On October 6, 2008, the Prime Minister of Iceland went on national television. His name was Geir Haarde, and what he said on that broadcast stopped the country cold. National bankruptcy. Not recession, not a downturn, bankruptcy for a sovereign country. Iceland's three largest banks, Kaupthing, Landsbanki, and Glitnir, had combined debts of roughly $182 billion. Iceland's entire GDP was about $17 billion. The banks owed 10 times what the whole country produced in a year. When they collapsed, there was nothing behind them. In 2008, every major Western government faced a version of the same problem. Banks too big to fail, debts too large to absorb, systems too interconnected to let collapse. The United States spent $700 billion bailing out its financial sector. The UK spent over £500 billion. Ireland, Greece, Spain, Portugal all chose some version of rescue, austerity, and a decade of painful recovery. Iceland chose something different, something no other country tried, and it recovered faster than any of them. This is the story of how. Before the crash, you need to understand the boom, because the scale of what Iceland built in 5 years is the only way to understand why the collapse was so total. And if you think this is a story about reckless bankers in a faraway island, you would be wrong about the second part. What Iceland did between 2003 and 2008 was a concentrated version of what every major financial center was doing. It just did it faster and with less runway to land on. For most of its modern history, Iceland was a fishing economy. Cod and haddock built its wealth. The population in 2008 was 320,000, roughly the size of a mid-sized British city like Coventry. Its banks were small, domestic, and unremarkable. Then in 1994, Iceland joined the European Economic Area, giving its banks the same single market access as EU member states. They could open branches across Europe, collect deposits from foreign retail customers, and borrow cheaply in international money markets. In 2003, the government privatized Landsbanki and Kaupthing. The new private owners had ambitions that bore no relationship to the size of their home economy. Between 2003 and 2008, the combined assets of Iceland's three largest banks more than doubled in 2004, then doubled again in 2005. Kaupthing acquired a Danish bank, a British investment firm, and stakes in Scandinavian institutions. Landsbanki's owners bought West Ham United Football Club, the Hamleys toy store chain, and stakes in British retailers including House of Fraser. Landsbanki launched IceSave, an online savings account offering interest rates above 5% that attracted more than 300,000 British and Dutch depositors. By mid-2008, the three banks had combined assets of $182 billion, approximately 10 times Iceland's annual GDP. No sovereign nation in modern history had produced such a mismatch between the size of its financial sector and the economy supposed to backstop it. The Icelandic krona had surged 900% against the euro between 1994 and 2008. As early as 2007, The Economist ranked it the most overvalued currency in the world. The warning signs were there, and they were ignored. The central bank governor warned the prime minister in late 2007 that the banks had lost all credibility abroad. The Financial Supervisory Authority had been alerted as early as 2004 that the banks were misreporting large exposures. None of it produced meaningful action. The banks kept growing. The krona kept rising. And in September 2008, Lehman Brothers collapsed in New York, and global credit markets froze overnight. The collapse of Lehman Brothers did not cause Iceland's crisis. It triggered it. The conditions that made the collapse inevitable had been building for 5 years. What happened in the first week of October 2008 was simply the point at which those conditions could no longer be papered over. And what followed, the speed and totality of the fall, was unlike anything any Western economy had seen in the post-war era. Understanding how fast it went matters, because it explains why the choices Iceland faced were so stark. October 6th, Prime Minister Harald broadcasts his national bankruptcy warning. Parliament passes emergency legislation granting the government authority to take control of failing banks. October 7th, Landsbanki is nationalized. Its IceSave accounts, holding the savings of more than 300,000 British and Dutch depositors, are frozen. The British government invokes anti-terrorism legislation to freeze Icelandic assets in the UK, in a move that Iceland's government considered deeply provocative. Gordon Brown is photographed announcing the action. The Icelandic word for terrorist starts trending. October 8th, Glitnir is taken over. October 9th, Kaupthing falls. All three major banks, representing over 90% of Iceland's banking system, have collapsed within 72 hours. The krona lost 50% of its value within weeks. Inflation surged to 18.6%. Unemployment jumped from 1% to 9% in months, the sharpest rise in the country's recorded history. The stock market fell 95%. Ordinary Icelanders who had taken out foreign currency loans to buy homes, common practice during the boom, watched their debt double overnight as the krona collapsed. Citizens took to the streets in what became known as the Pots and Pans Revolution. They banged cookware outside the Althingi Parliament building until the government fell. A new election was called. Iceland became the first Western European country to seek an IMF bailout since Britain in 1976. The IMF approved a $2.1 billion bailout package in November 2008, supplemented by $2.5 billion from Iceland's Nordic neighbors. But the money came with conditions: austerity, structural reform, and a reckoning with exactly how the crisis had happened. What Iceland did with that reckoning was the decision that separated its recovery from every other country's. Every country that faced a banking crisis after 2008 faced a version of the same fork. Do you rescue the institutions, protect depositors, keep the system running, absorb the losses onto the public balance sheet? Or do you let the market work, take the immediate pain, and restructure from the ground up? The United States, the United Kingdom, Ireland, and most of the eurozone chose the first path. Iceland, with far less capacity to absorb the losses and far more public anger at the people who caused them, chose something closer to the second. And it made three specific decisions that no other country made. If this kind of breakdown is useful, subscribing takes 2 seconds and means you get the next video automatically. Anyway, decision 1, let the banks fail. Iceland did not bail out its banks. The government guaranteed domestic deposits. Icelandic savers kept their money. But foreign creditors and shareholders were not protected. The old banks were put into receivership. New, smaller, domestically focused banks were created to take over their domestic operations. Foreign creditors, including the British and Dutch governments who had guaranteed the IceSave deposits, pursued Iceland through the courts for years. Iceland won. The EFTA court ruled in 2013 that Iceland was not obliged to repay the minimum deposit guarantees to British and Dutch savers. Decision 2. Impose capital controls. To prevent the krona from collapsing entirely, the government imposed strict controls on capital flows out of the country. Money could not leave Iceland freely. This was heterodox. The IMF itself had historically opposed capital controls as damaging to investment and growth. Iceland's program was the first IMF package that explicitly included them. They stayed in place until 2017. Decision 3. Let the currency devalue. Unlike the eurozone countries that faced similar crises but were locked into a shared currency, Iceland had the krona. It devalued by 50%. That was devastating for anyone with foreign currency debts. But it made Icelandic exports, fish, aluminium, and increasingly tourism, dramatically cheaper on world markets overnight. The devaluation that destroyed household balance sheets simultaneously rescued the export sector. These three decisions, taken together, meant Iceland absorbed its crisis differently from every comparable country. It took the immediate pain, rather than spreading it over a decade of austerity. It protected domestic savers while letting foreign creditors bear losses, and it used its monetary sovereignty, the one tool eurozone countries did not have, to begin the export-led recovery almost immediately. There is one more thing Iceland did that every other country refused to do. And it matters not just as a story of accountability, but because the absence of it in every other country tells you something important about how financial crises are handled and who they are handled for. After 2008, no senior banker in the United States, the United Kingdom, Ireland, or Germany went to prison for their role in the crisis. In Iceland, 26 bankers did. That difference is not a footnote. It is the story. Iceland established a special prosecutor's office specifically to investigate the banking collapse. Ólafur Hauksson, a district police commissioner from a town of 1,500 people, was appointed to lead it. His office spent years going through the bank's internal records, finding evidence of market manipulation, breach of fiduciary duty, and systematic fraud. The charges were specific and provable. Banks had been lending money to their own shareholders to buy the bank's own shares, artificially inflating their stock prices. The loans were often made through shell companies to disguise the circular nature of the transactions. In one case, Kaupthing had lent money to a Qatari investor to buy a stake in Kaupthing, effectively lending someone money to make it look like an outside investor had confidence in the bank. The investor bore no real risk. The bank bore all of it. Hreiðar Már Sigurdsson, former CEO of Kaupthing, received a 5.5-year sentence. Sigurður Einarsson, Kaupthing's chairman, received 4 years. Ólafur Ólafsson, a major shareholder, was sentenced to 4.5 years. In total, 26 individuals received prison sentences amounting to roughly 100 man-years of combined imprisonment. The Supreme Court of Iceland processed the cases through 2019. To be fair here, and this channel will always tell you when something is genuinely contested, critics argued that the prosecutions caught the small fish, while the biggest architects of the system escaped serious punishment. Some convictions were overturned on appeal, and the question of whether Iceland's prosecutions produced better long-term financial governance or were primarily a form of political catharsis is debated by economists. But no serious analyst disputes the basic fact. Iceland held its bankers criminally accountable in a way that the United States, the United Kingdom, and the eurozone deliberately chose not to. The Special Prosecutor's Office cost Iceland roughly 1.6 billion kroner to run. The total fines and asset recoveries from the prosecutions returned far more than that to the public purse. More importantly, the prosecutions changed the political conditions under which Iceland's recovery happened. The public anger that had driven people into the streets in January 2009 had somewhere to go. The system had not simply been bailed out and allowed to continue unchanged. Something had been different here. Here's the part that makes Iceland's story more than a cautionary tale about banking hubris: the recovery. Because if Iceland had simply crashed and stayed down, the decisions it made would be a historical curiosity. What makes those decisions significant is that the country which took the most immediate pain recovered faster than the countries that spread theirs over a decade. And the mechanism of that recovery was not what anyone predicted in 2009. The recovery had two engines, and neither was the one the IMF program was primarily designed around. The first was the krona's devaluation. A currency that had lost half its value made Iceland extraordinarily cheap for foreign visitors. Tourism arrivals, which had stood at roughly 500,000 in 2008, began rising almost immediately after the crash. By 2017, 2.3 million people visited Iceland, a country of 340,000. By 2018, the number had grown to 2.3 million. The tourism sector, which employed 15,000 people before the crisis, was employing over 40,000 within a decade, around 20% of the entire Icelandic workforce. The Blue Lagoon, which charged 20 euros for admission in 2008, now charges 60 to 90 euros, with visitor numbers still growing. The second engine was the fish. Iceland's core export, the cod and haddock industry that had built the country before the banks remade it, became dramatically more competitive the moment the krona collapsed. Icelandic seafood sold in London, Tokyo, and New York was suddenly a fraction of its pre-crisis price in foreign currency terms. The fishing industry, which the banking boom had overshadowed and partly crowded out for talent and capital, quietly returned to prominence and began generating the foreign exchange the new economy needed. By 2012, Iceland had begun repaying its IMF loans ahead of schedule. By 2015, GDP had returned to pre-crisis levels. By 2016, unemployment had fallen to 3%. Iceland regained its investment-grade credit rating. The capital controls, maintained until 2017, were lifted without triggering the currency crisis that had been feared. Ireland, which chose the bailout path, took until 2014 to return to growth, and spent a decade under EU fiscal surveillance. Greece, which also chose austerity within the euro, saw its economy contract for 6 consecutive years and had not fully recovered its pre-crisis output 15 years later. The comparison is not exact. Iceland had monetary sovereignty that eurozone countries lacked, and its banks' foreign creditors absorbed losses that in Ireland's case were transferred to the Irish state. But the direction of the evidence is clear. Taking the short, sharp shock, prosecuting those responsible, and using every tool of monetary policy available produced a faster and more complete recovery than spreading the pain across a decade. Gerhard's warning of national bankruptcy was accurate. Iceland was, in October 2008, facing an economic collapse without precedent for a Western country in the post-war era. What followed was not a rescue, it was a restructuring. The banks were not saved, the bankers were prosecuted, the currency was allowed to fall. The pain was concentrated into 3 years rather than spread across a decade, and then the country got back to work, with fish and tourists, and a financial sector a fraction of the size of the one that had nearly destroyed it. Iceland is not a template. A country of 340,000 with its own currency and no systemic importance to the global financial system had options that the United States and the United Kingdom did not. But it demonstrated something that every other country chose not to test, that banks can fail, bankers can be jailed, currencies can fall, and the economy can still come back, faster than anyone predicted. The world chose bailouts. Iceland chose accountability. The recovery data is available to anyone who wants to look. Iceland's banking system collapsed because it grew to 10 times the size of the economy it was supposed to serve. The men who built it had no memory of banking crises, no real regulatory check, and unlimited access to cheap money from international markets. There is a country that built a banking system in the opposite way, slowly, over 3 centuries, on political neutrality, legal secrecy, and the accumulated trust of every European aristocrat, dictator, arms dealer, and tax evader who needed somewhere safe to put their money. It codified that secrecy in a law that made disclosure a criminal offense. It processed Nazi gold while simultaneously sheltering the assets of people fleeing the Nazis. And it still manages more of the world's private wealth than any other country on Earth, even after the secrecy is gone. That video will show you exactly how a landlocked country of 9 million people came to manage $9 trillion in assets, what law built the system, what the system was actually used to hide, and why the money stayed even after the secrecy ended. It is on this channel right now.